Let's start with a scene that has played out in parking lots across America with remarkable consistency. Two cars pull into the same parking lot. The first car is a gleaming current-year luxury SUV, the kind with the ambient interior lighting that changes colors and the seats that remember 12 different people's preferred positions. The second car is a 7-year-old sedan with 90,000 miles on it, a small dent above the rear wheel that never quite got fixed, and an air freshener hanging from the mirror that is doing its best under difficult circumstances. The person who gets out of the luxury SUV is making $180,000 per year, has $23,000 in credit card debt, drives a car they technically cannot afford but feel they need to drive given their professional image, and has a net worth of approximately $47,000, mostly in a 401k that they've been meaning to increase their contributions to since 2019. The person who gets out of the dented sedan is also making $180,000 per year. They have no consumer debt. They bought the sedan used 4 years ago for $18,000 cash. Their net worth is $890,000 and climbing. They are on track to be financially independent in 7 years, and they are genuinely, quietly happy about it. Here's the part that makes this scenario genuinely interesting. The person in the luxury SUV looks rich. The person in the dented sedan does not. And the person in the dented sedan is getting richer every month while the person in the luxury SUV is getting poorer every month while performing the visual presentation of the opposite. This video is about that dynamic, about the specific, counterintuitive, occasionally uncomfortable relationship between looking wealthy and being wealthy, a relationship that is, in most cases, not just uncorrelated but actively inverse. The more money you visibly spend on looking rich, the less money you have to actually become rich. The less money you visibly spend on looking rich, the more money you have to actually become rich. The equation is that simple and that consistently ignored. This is not a video about being cheap. This is not a lecture about skipping lattes and driving beaters as a moral virtue. This is a video about understanding the specific psychological, financial, and social mechanics of wealth signaling, why people do it, what it costs, who it benefits, and what the people who are actually, genuinely, durably building wealth are doing instead. Some of what you're about to hear will validate decisions you've already made. Some of it will reframe spending choices you've been feeling guilty about in ways that might actually make you feel better about them. And at least one part of it will make you look at a specific object you own, or plan to own, in a way that you won't easily shake. Let's start. Chapter 1. The Wealth Illusion. Why what looks like money isn't. Here's the foundational concept this entire video is built on, and it deserves more than a passing acknowledgement because it is simultaneously obvious once stated and consistently ignored in practice. Wealth and the appearance of wealth are not the same thing. They are not even reliably correlated. In a consumer economy specifically designed to make them appear identical, they are frequently opposite. Wealth is a stock. It is what you have accumulated, the assets, the investments, the equity, the financial position that exists independent of your income and independent of your spending. Wealth is what remains if your income stops tomorrow. It is the number that determines whether you are financially free or financially trapped. The appearance of wealth is a flow. It is what you spend, the visible, ongoing expenditure on things that signal status and success to observers. The car, the house, the watch, the wardrobe, the restaurant, the vacation photo. The appearance of wealth requires continuous financial output to maintain. Stop the spending and the appearance evaporates. The critical relationship between these two things. Every dollar spent on the appearance of wealth is a dollar not available for the accumulation of actual wealth. The $2,000 per month car payment is not neutral. It is not simply the cost of transportation, it is the compounding investment return foregone on $2,000 per month, every month, for however many years the payment continues. At 7% annual return, $2,000 per month invested for 10 years is approximately $345,000. The car that cost $2,000 per month in payments for 10 years is worth approximately $8,000 at the end of those 10 years. The wealth gap between the person who made the investment and the person who made the car payment, from a single decision held constant for a decade, is approximately $337,000. This is the wealth illusion in its most concrete financial form. The choice to appear wealthy costs more wealth than almost any other financial decision available. The net worth statistics that explain everything. Here's the data that provides the most concrete evidence for the inverse relationship between wealth appearance and wealth accumulation. The net worth statistics that consistently shock people when they encounter them for the first time. The Millionaire Next Door, the landmark study by Thomas Stanley and William Danko that has never been adequately superseded by subsequent research, documented something that was genuinely surprising when published, and that remains genuinely surprising to most people who encounter it. The majority of millionaires in America live in houses that are not the most expensive on the block, drive cars that are not the newest or most expensive available, wear clothes that are not luxury branded, and are, in the assessments of casual observers, not distinguishable from the upper middle class professionals who earn similar incomes but have a fraction of their net worth. The millionaires who accumulate and maintain genuine wealth are overwhelmingly people who have not spent their accumulation years performing wealth for observers. They have spent those years quietly, deliberately, systematically building the asset base that is wealth, with little visible evidence of what was happening because the visible evidence of wealth accumulation is, almost by definition, private. Account balances don't show, portfolio values don't show, net worth doesn't show, only spending shows, and the people who were spending least were building most. The counterpart finding is equally striking. The most visibly wealthy people in most professional communities, the ones with the most impressive cars, the most impressive houses, the most impressive outward presentation of financial success, are frequently among the least financially secure. The high-income professional whose lifestyle has scaled precisely with their income has a net worth that is modest relative to their earnings history, a financial resilience that is minimal, and a financial independence that is decades away despite a career of impressive paychecks. The consumption visibility bias. Here's the specific cognitive bias that makes the wealth illusion so powerful and so persistent despite being, once articulated, fairly obvious. What is visible gets overweighted in assessment, and what is invisible gets underweighted or ignored entirely. Wealth is invisible. The investment account balance, the net worth figure, the financial independence timeline, none of these are visible to observers. They produce no external signal that can be observed, assessed, and incorporated into social status judgments. Spending is visible. The car in the driveway, the house on the street, the watch on the wrist, the restaurant where you're seen, all of these are visible, observable, interpretable. They produce the external signal that gets incorporated into social status assessments, whether the person doing the assessing intends to or not. The result is a systematic social attribution of wealth based on spending visibility rather than on actual financial position, and because social status matters to most humans in ways that are both powerful and partly unconscious, this systematic misattribution creates the incentive to spend on visibility even when the spending is financially destructive. The person who understands the consumption visibility bias has a specific advantage. They can choose to opt out of the social game of wealth signaling with full awareness of what they're opting out of, and with the specific knowledge that the people whose assessments they are declining to optimize for are themselves probably not as wealthy as their spending suggests. The status game. You didn't sign up for, but are probably playing. Here's the uncomfortable question that the consumption visibility bias raises, the one that most people have never explicitly asked about their own financial lives. To what extent are your current spending decisions driven by genuine preference, and to what extent are they driven by the specific desire to produce a certain impression in specific observers? The honest answer for most people is that the distinction is blurry. Human preferences are not formed in a vacuum. They are shaped by the social environment, by the consumption standards of the peer group, by the marketing messages that systematically associate specific products with the social identity the consumer wants to project. The desire for the luxury car is genuine, in the sense that the person really does want it, and it is also significantly constructed by the social dynamics of the professional environment, where that car is the visible marker of arrival. The wealth builder's advantage is not the suppression of these desires, it is the specific clarity about which desires are genuinely personal, rooted in the actual experience of the thing rather than in its social signal, and which are performance desires, rooted in what the thing communicates to observers rather than in what it actually provides. This clarity, developed honestly and applied consistently to spending decisions, produces a financial life that is organized around genuine preference rather than around social performance, and the financial consequence of that shift is the accumulation of the wealth that the social performance was consuming. Chapter 2: The Psychology of Wealth. Signaling: Why smart people do financially stupid things. Here's the chapter that addresses the most important question this video raises and that most financial content conveniently avoids. If the inverse relationship between looking rich and being rich is this clear, why do so many intelligent, financially literate people continue to spend heavily on wealth signals rather than on wealth accumulation? The answer is not stupidity, the answer is psychology, specifically a set of well-documented, deeply embedded psychological mechanisms that make wealth signaling feel rational, necessary, and even genuinely satisfying in ways that are difficult to override with purely logical financial analysis. The tribal status mechanism. Here's the evolutionary foundation of wealth signaling behavior. The specific reason that the desire to signal status through visible resources is not a modern consumer weakness, but a deeply hardwired human motivation with roots that predate money, markets, and luxury goods by hundreds of thousands of years. Humans are tribal animals. For most of human evolutionary history, social status within the tribe was a matter of genuine survival importance. The higher status individual had preferential access to food, to mates, to protection, to resources that lower status individuals competed for. Status was worth pursuing because the differential in outcomes between high status and low status individuals was significant and sometimes fatal. The signals that indicated high status in early human societies were primarily signals of resource access and resource quality: the best food, the best tools, the best shelter, the adornment that indicated social position. The human brain evolved to both produce these status signals and to read them in others, to associate visible resource display with high status, and to motivate the production of such signals as a strategy for social positioning. In the modern consumer economy, this ancient tribal status mechanism has been captured and monetized with extraordinary effectiveness. The luxury goods industry, the automotive industry, the fashion industry, the real estate industry, all have organized their marketing around the specific appeal to the tribal status mechanism that produces the reliable motivation to spend on visible resources regardless of the actual financial wisdom of doing so. The result is that the purchase of a luxury car or an expensive watch or a house in the prestigious neighborhood produces a specific neurological reward, the status elevation experience, that is genuinely pleasurable in the way that eating a good meal is genuinely pleasurable. It is not irrational in the sense of being without foundation in genuine experience. The experience is real. The question is whether the financial cost of producing the experience is justified by the experience's actual value. And for most people, in most status signaling spending situations, the honest answer is no. The social comparison trap. Here's the specific mechanism that converts the general tribal status motivation into the specific spending behavior that wealth signaling produces: social comparison. The systematic, largely automatic process of evaluating our own resources, capabilities, and status relative to the people around us, and the specific discomfort that downward comparison produces. Social comparison theory, developed by Leon Festinger and subsequently elaborated by decades of psychological research, establishes that humans have a pervasive tendency to evaluate themselves relative to others, particularly in domains that matter for social status. In domains where status is important, the comparison is not neutral. Being below the reference group produces genuine psychological discomfort, and eliminating that discomfort is a genuine motivator of behavior. In financial and material domains, the reference group comparison produces the specific phenomenon known as keeping up with the Joneses, the systematic tendency to consume at the level of the peer group rather than at the level that financial wisdom would independently suggest, because falling behind the peer group's consumption standard produces the social comparison discomfort that most people find genuinely aversive. The specific financial damage of social comparison-driven spending is that it scales with income in a way that prevents wealth accumulation at every income level. The person earning $50,000 compares to the peer group consuming at $50,000 and has nothing left to save. The person earning $150,000 compares to the peer group consuming at $150,000 and has nothing left to invest. The comparison mechanism ensures that spending always approaches the available income regardless of the absolute level, because the comparison is always to the peer group consuming at a similar income rather than to an absolute standard of sufficiency. The identity investment. Here's the psychological mechanism that makes wealth signaling most difficult to disentangle from genuine preference. The specific way that consumer goods become invested with identity, meaning that makes the spending feel not like status performance but like authentic self-expression. When a person has owned a specific brand of car, worn a specific style of clothing, or lived in a specific type of neighborhood for long enough, those consumption choices stop feeling like choices and start feeling like characteristics, not things they have decided to do, but things that reflect who they are. The BMW becomes not just a car, but a signal of professional identity. The designer bag becomes not just a bag, but an expression of aesthetic values. The house in the prestigious neighborhood becomes not just a house, but a statement of the family they have built and the success they have achieved. This identity investment makes the suggestion of consuming at a lower level feel not like a financial optimization, but like an identity threat. Not, would a cheaper car serve my transportation needs, but would a cheaper car be consistent with who I am? The latter question is much harder to answer with financial logic because it involves the identity rather than the function. The wealth builder's specific psychological work in this context is the gradual disentanglement of genuine identity, the actual values, preferences, and characteristics that define the self, from the consumption signals that have been associated with that identity through marketing and social observation. This disentanglement is genuinely difficult and genuinely worthwhile because the person who has completed it makes spending decisions that are organized around actual experience and actual value rather than around the maintenance of a consumption-based identity that is costing them wealth they have not yet built. The signaling trap's most expensive form, the professional image justification. Here's the specific form of wealth signaling psychology that is most financially damaging precisely because it comes with the most convincing justification, the professional image justification for wealth signaling spending. The professional image justification goes like this. In my professional context, the visible presentation of success is not optional. My clients, my colleagues, my professional community expect a certain level of visible success as evidence of the competence and social standing that makes me worth working with or doing business with. The expensive car, the impressive office, the designer clothing, these are not personal indulgences but professional necessities, investments in the business development that produces the income that funds everything else. This justification is not entirely wrong. Professional context matters. In some industries and some professional relationships, visible signals of success do affect professional credibility in ways that have genuine financial consequences. The real estate agent who drives clients to properties in a car that signals professional success may close more deals than the identical agent in a car that signals nothing, but the professional image justification is almost always significantly more expansive than the actual professional need requires. The car that signals adequate professional success can be achieved for significantly less than the car that signals maximum professional success. The clothing that projects professional credibility can be achieved for significantly less than the clothing that projects luxury consumption. The office that conveys professional seriousness can be achieved for significantly less than the office that signals wealth. The professional justification typically covers 20% to 30% of the actual spending it is used to justify, with the remaining 70% to 80% being the personal status signaling that the professional framing makes more comfortable to maintain. The honest assessment of the professional image justification, applied honestly to any specific spending decision it is being used to support, is one of the most financially productive exercises available because it typically reveals the actual professional necessity is both smaller and cheaper than the justification suggests. Chapter 3. The Real Cost of Looking Rich. Running the numbers that most people refuse to run. Here's the chapter that converts the psychological analysis of the previous chapters into the specific financial mathematics that make the cost of wealth signaling concrete rather than abstract. Because the psychological mechanisms that drive wealth signaling are powerful enough that abstract arguments about opportunity cost don't adequately convey the scale of the financial damage. The numbers need to be specific, the compounding needs to be shown, the comparison between the wealth signaling financial trajectory and the wealth building financial trajectory needs to be run explicitly. This is that chapter, and the numbers are, even for people who have thought about this before, probably larger than you expect. The car decision, the single most expensive status purchase. Most people make. Here's the status purchase that deserves the most detailed financial analysis because it is the most expensive recurring wealth signaling expenditure in most households, and because the professional image justification is most frequently applied to it. The car decision, the average new. Car purchase in the United States costs approximately $48,000 as of recent data. Financed over 60 months at a typical interest rate, this produces a monthly payment of approximately $900 to $1,000. Add insurance for a newer, more expensive vehicle, typically $150 to $250 more per month than comparable coverage for a used vehicle, and the monthly carrying cost of the average new car is approximately $1,100 to $1,250. The used car alternative, a 3 to 5-year-old version of a comparable vehicle, purchased for $20,000 to $25,000, financed over a shorter term, or purchased outright from savings, has a monthly carrying cost of approximately $300 to $500, including insurance. The monthly difference between these two options, $700 to $750 per month, invested at historical average market returns over the typical ownership period of a vehicle, produces the following outcomes by time period. Over 5 years, approximately $52,000. Over 10 years, approximately $123,000. Over 20 years, approximately $390,000. Over 30 years, the time horizon most people have between their first significant car purchase and retirement, approximately $943,000, nearly $1 million, from a single category of spending decision, held constant over 30 years. The car decision is not a small financial choice. It is, for most people, one of the 2 or 3 most consequential financial decisions of their lives, in the same category as the housing decision and the savings rate decision, because it is expensive, recurring, socially pressured toward the expensive option, and made repeatedly over a lifetime, with each iteration compounding the opportunity cost of the previous ones. The specific form of the car wealth signaling trap that is most financially damaging is the lease trap, the financial structure that maximizes monthly payment relative to equity accumulated, and that is specifically designed to make the most expensive vehicle accessible at a monthly payment that seems manageable, while ensuring that no equity is ever built and that the signaling expense never ends. The person who has been leasing successive vehicles for 20 years has spent $250,000 or more on vehicles and owns nothing, no equity, no asset, no vehicle. The same $250,000 invested over 20 years at 7% is $966,000. The leaseholder's 20-year wealth gap from the vehicle decision alone is approximately $966,000 relative to what was financially possible. The house decision, where status meets the largest purchase of most lives. Here's the second major category of wealth signaling expenditure, the housing decision, where the status premium is both the largest in absolute dollars and the most socially complex to address because the housing decision is simultaneously a consumption decision, an investment decision, and one of the most socially visible status signals available. The specific housing wealth signaling trap is the purchase of significantly more house than the household's genuine living needs require in a neighborhood or on a street where the house's social signal is a primary motivation, alongside its function as shelter and home. This trap is expensive not only in the purchase price, but in all the carrying costs that scale with the house's size and quality, property taxes that scale with assessed value, insurance that scales with replacement cost, maintenance that scales with square footage and finish quality, utilities that scale with size, and the furnishing and decoration spending that the impressive house implicitly requires. The financial analysis of the housing status premium is specific. The household that buys a $700,000 house when a $450,000 house would genuinely serve their living needs has made a $250,000 status premium decision. At a 7% mortgage rate, the additional carrying cost of the $250,000 premium is approximately $1,660 per month in mortgage payment alone, before the proportionally higher taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utilities. Over 30 years, the total additional expenditure on the housing status premium, including these carrying costs, is approximately $700,000 to $900,000 in nominal terms. The opportunity cost of investing the monthly premium instead, $1,660 per month invested at 7% over 30 years, is approximately $1,900,000. The housing status premium decision's total financial impact, the additional spending plus the investment return foregone, is approximately $2,600,000 to $2,800,000 over 30 years from a single housing decision. The housing decision deserves particular attention because it is the spending category where the professional image justification is most powerfully deployed, where the social comparison pressure is most intense, and where the one-time framing of the decision obscures its actual character as a 30-year recurring commitment to a specific monthly expenditure level. The luxury brand. Premium, the smallest individual purchase, with the largest collective cost. Here's the wealth signaling expenditure category that produces the least dramatic individual financial impact and the most significant collective financial impact. The luxury brand premium across the full range of spending categories where branded versions of functional goods command significant premiums primarily for the status signal rather than for functional superiority. The luxury brand premium is the difference in price between the functional equivalent and the status signaling version of the same good. The $400 watch versus the $4,000 watch. The $80 leather wallet versus the $500 designer wallet. The $150 running shoes versus the $450 limited edition version. The $25 bottle of wine versus the $200 bottle for the same dinner table. Individually, these premiums seem manageable. The $3,600 premium on the watch is a one-time expense. The $420 premium on the wallet is occasional. The $300 premium on the running shoes is periodic. The aggregate of these premiums across the full range of luxury branded goods in a household's consumption, clothing, accessories, personal care products, food and beverages, home goods, technology, travel, is typically $15,000 to $40,000 per year for households in the upper middle income range that are most intensively targeted by luxury brand marketing. At the higher end of this range, $40,000 per year invested at 7% for 20 years is $1,730,000. The household that has been paying the luxury brand premium across their spending for 20 years has transferred approximately $1,730,000 in potential wealth to the shareholders of the luxury goods companies that produce the items. In exchange for the specific social signal that the branded items provide, the total wealth signaling cost. Adding it up. Here's the aggregate financial picture of a household that has made the status signaling choices across the three major categories described in this chapter: the car, the house, the luxury brand premium, compared to the identical household that has made the wealth-building equivalent choices. The wealth signaling household, new luxury vehicle lease, $1,200 per month. House with $250,000 status premium, $1,660 per month additional. Luxury brand premium across consumption categories, $2,500 per month. Total monthly status premium, $5,360 per month above the functional equivalent choices. The wealth building equivalent, paid off used vehicle, $350 per month total cost. House size to genuine need, saving $1,660 per month in mortgage and carrying costs. Functional equivalent consumer goods, saving $2,500 per month in brand premiums. Monthly difference available for investment, $5,360. $5,360 per month invested at 7% annual return for 25 years is approximately $4,600,000. The wealth gap between the wealth signaling household and the wealth building household from these spending decisions held constant over 25 years is approximately $4,600,000. Not from different incomes, not from different investment strategies, from different decisions about what to do with the same income, whether to convert it into the appearance of wealth or into actual wealth. This is the number that makes the case. Not abstractly, not philosophically, but mathematically. The cost of looking rich is, for the household that has made the full range of status premium spending decisions, approximately $4.6 million over a 25-year period. The car in the parking lot from the introduction is not a small difference. It is a multi-million-dollar decision about which direction the financial life is going to travel, and the person in the dented sedan knew it. Chapter 4. The Stealth Wealth Playbook. What the actually rich actually do. Here's the chapter that moves from the analysis of what wealth signaling costs to the description of what the people who are actually genuinely, durably wealthy actually do. The specific behavioral patterns, spending orientations, and financial practices of people whose net worth is real rather than performed. This chapter is not about deprivation. It is not about living in squalor to accumulate a number in an account that you never enjoy. It is about the specific alternative to wealth signaling that produces genuine financial security, genuine financial freedom, and this is the part that surprises most people when they first encounter it, a genuinely high quality of life that is, in most meaningful dimensions, superior to the quality of life that wealth signaling produces. The people who practice what has come to be called stealth wealth, the deliberate choice to accumulate genuine financial resources without the visible performance of having accumulated them, are not secretly miserable people white-knuckling their way through decades of deprivation toward some imagined future payoff. They are, by a consistent and documented margin, more financially satisfied, more financially secure, and more genuinely happy with their financial lives than the wealth signalers whose visible success they are conspicuously not competing with. The spending philosophy of the genuinely wealthy. Here's the specific spending philosophy that research on high net worth individuals consistently reveals. A philosophy that is so different from the popular image of wealthy spending that it requires specific description rather than assumption. The genuinely wealthy spend heavily on things that produce genuine, lasting, private value, experiences with people they love, health and physical well-being, quality in the specific domains that matter deeply to them personally, and spend very little on the visible, social, status signaling dimensions of consumption that drive most of the spending of people who are performing wealth. The distinction is between private value and public value. Private value is the actual experience of the thing, the quality of the meal, the comfort of the home, the performance of the tool, the restoration of the vacation. Public value is the signal the thing produces, the impression the car makes on observers, the status the neighborhood conveys to the peer group, the brand recognition on the watch. The genuinely wealthy have, through some combination of financial confidence and evolved values, largely decoupled their spending from public value and directed it almost entirely toward private value. They spend generously on what genuinely improves their actual experience of life and spend very little on what merely communicates to others that their life is worth envying. The financial consequence of this spending philosophy is the one that the previous chapter quantified. The money not spent on public value is available for investment, and the investment compounds into the genuine wealth that the public value spending was pretending to signal. The specific behaviors. A field guide to stealth wealth. Here's the behavioral fingerprint of the stealth wealthy. The specific observable behaviors that distinguish the genuinely wealthy from the wealth performers, assembled from research, from documented accounts, and from the consistent patterns that appear across different cultural and economic contexts. They drive used or modest vehicles. The most consistent finding across every study of millionaire behavior is the vehicle decision, the overwhelming preference for used, paid-off functional vehicles over new, financed, luxury ones. Not because they cannot afford the luxury alternative, but because they have done the financial analysis and find the status premium absurd relative to the actual transportation value delivered. Warren Buffett drove a Lincoln Town car he'd had for years before media pressure eventually pushed him toward a slightly newer model. The late Sam Walton famously drove a battered pickup truck for years while building what became the world's largest retail empire. These are not people performing poverty. These are people who found the vehicle status game genuinely uninteresting relative to the financial opportunity cost of playing it. They live in houses that are comfortable but not impressive. The stealth wealthy household is typically in a neighborhood that is pleasant but not prestigious, a neighborhood chosen for livability, for school quality, for community character, not for the statement the address makes. The house itself is well maintained, genuinely comfortable, and appropriately sized for the household's actual needs. It is not the most impressive house on the block. It is not the house that makes guests quietly assess the owner's financial success. It is the house where the family genuinely lives, and the significant financial resources not deployed in housing status are quietly compounding somewhere less visible. They are largely indifferent to visible brand signals in their consumer goods. The stealth wealthy person's watch tells time. Their clothing fits well and is maintained carefully, but is not identified by the brand insignia that makes the luxury version worth 10 times more than the functional equivalent. Their wallet holds cards and cash. Their phone is the model that serves their communication needs, rather than the model that signals their willingness to pay a premium for the latest version. This brand indifference is not principled asceticism. It is the product of a specific value orientation that has genuinely stopped finding the brand signal interesting, that has decoupled social status from consumer brand association enough that the premium for the signal simply does not feel worth paying. They invest with consistency and patience. The stealth wealthy household is consistently, automatically, patiently investing a significant fraction of income, typically 20% to 40% or more, in diversified, low-cost index funds or comparable instruments. The investment is not exciting. It does not produce the social signal that visible spending produces. Nobody at the dinner party is impressed by the Vanguard Total Market Fund. But it compounds, quietly, invisibly, into the actual wealth that the visible spending of the wealth performer is simultaneously failing to build and actively pretending to have. They are generous in genuinely private ways. The stealth wealthy are not characteristically stingy. The image of the wealthy miser who accumulated by never spending on others is a caricature that doesn't describe the actual population of genuinely wealthy people with any accuracy. They tend to be generous, in ways that are private, relationship-oriented, and not primarily designed to produce social recognition of the generosity. The anonymous donation, the genuine investment in family members' education or well-being, the pickup of the dinner check for the group without production. Generosity without performance. The confidence asymmetry. Here's the specific psychological feature of the stealth wealthy that is most difficult to develop and most consequential once developed: the confidence to be financially misread. The stealth wealthy person is regularly, systematically underestimated by observers who read their spending as a proxy for their financial position. The modest car is read as financial limitation. The unpretentious house is read as modest success. The absence of visible luxury signals is read as the absence of the success those signals would indicate. The person who needs others to accurately read their financial success from their spending cannot practice stealth wealth, because the inaccurate reading produces too much psychological discomfort to sustain. The person who has developed the specific confidence to know their financial position without needing others to know it can absorb the systematic underestimation and continue building. This confidence is not arrogance. It is the specific psychological security that comes from having a genuine financial position rather than a performed one, from knowing that the net worth number is real regardless of what the car in the driveway communicates. It is the confidence of someone who knows exactly how the game works and has decided to win it on the terms that produce actual winning rather than the terms that produce the appearance of it. The social life of the stealth wealthy. Here's the social dimension of stealth wealth that most people are most concerned about when they first encounter the concept. The question of whether opting out of the wealth signaling game means opting out of the social world that the wealth signaling game structures. The answer, which is both reassuring and somewhat clarifying about the social world being opted out of, is only partially, and the partial opting out is mostly positive. The stealth wealthy person loses the social positioning that wealth signaling provides in the specific social context where wealth signaling is the primary currency, the peer group that competes primarily on consumption display, the social circles where the car and the house and the watch are the primary conversational and social status signals. In these contexts, the stealth wealthy person is indeed disadvantaged relative to the wealth performer. Their social position in the consumption competition hierarchy is lower than their actual financial position would suggest if it were visible. What they gain is both more valuable and more durable. the social relationships that are formed on the basis of genuine connection rather than status display, the peer communities where substance and character rather than consumption level are the primary currency, and the specific freedom of not being required to maintain a spending level that their social position has come to expect, the social relationships that the stealth wealthy tend to cultivate, often deliberately, as their financial values become clearer, are characterized by genuine warmth, genuine mutual investment, and genuine independence from the financial performance that consumption status relationships require. These relationships are, by most meaningful measures, better relationships, and they are available only to the person who has opted out of the consumption competition sufficiently to stop performing for the audience that competition requires. Chapter 5: The Debt Trap. How wealth signaling becomes a financial prison. Here's the chapter that addresses the specific mechanism through which wealth signaling stops being a choice and becomes a trap. The process by which the financial commitments made to produce the appearance of wealth gradually consume the financial freedom of the person who made them, creating a prison constructed entirely from the bars of their own status signaling decisions. The debt trap of wealth signaling is not an accident. It is the predictable mathematical outcome of a specific pattern of financial decision-making, a pattern that most people who enter it don't fully recognize as a pattern until it has accumulated enough to be genuinely constraining. How the trap gets built. One reasonable decision at a time. Here's the specific sequence through which most wealth signaling debt traps are constructed, the series of individually justifiable decisions that collectively produce a financial position of genuine constraint. The sequence begins with a career success that generates an income increase. The income increase is real and significant: a promotion, a better job, a business growth. And the lifestyle adjustment that follows it is experienced as deserved and appropriate rather than as a strategic error. The apartment is upgraded. The car is upgraded. The clothing budget is increased. The dining becomes more frequent and more expensive. Each individual upgrade is financially supportable at the new income level. The household is not spending more than it earns. It is simply living at the level that its new income permits. The second step is the major status commitment, typically the house, that is made at the maximum borrowable amount rather than at a level calibrated to financial goals. The mortgage payment is large but supportable. The down payment depleted savings that might otherwise have become investments. The carrying costs, taxes, insurance, maintenance, are higher than anticipated but manageable. The household is fully committed to a specific monthly expenditure level that requires the full current income to maintain. The third step is the accumulation of the ancillary status commitments that the major commitment implies. The impressive house requires impressive furniture. The professional image requires the car upgrade. The peer group's consumption standard requires the restaurant frequency. The vacation quality, the clothing level. Each ancillary commitment is individually small relative to the major commitment, but collectively they have added $2,000 to $4,000 per month to the monthly financial obligation. The fourth step is the arrival of the unexpected, the income disruption, the major expense, the economic event that creates financial stress in a household that has no financial buffer because every available dollar has been committed to maintaining the status signaling infrastructure. The response to the unexpected in the absence of savings or investments that can be liquidated is consumer debt. The credit card balance that grows to cover the gap, the home equity line that is accessed to manage the crisis, the personal loan that bridges the period of financial disruption. The fifth step is the discovery that the consumer debt is permanent rather than temporary, that the income available for debt repayment, after the full cost of maintaining the status signaling lifestyle, is insufficient to make meaningful progress on the debt balance. The household is now spending on the status signals, paying the interest on the debt that the status signals required, and making minimal progress on either the debt or any form of wealth accumulation. This is the trap, fully assembled, built from individually justifiable decisions that collectively produced a financial position of genuine constraint. Where the monthly obligations are real and unavoidable, the financial flexibility is near zero, and the exit requires either a significant income increase or a significant lifestyle reduction, either of which is both practically difficult and psychologically costly. The interest rate reality, the cost of appearance in annual percentage. Here's the specific financial cost of the debt that wealth signaling accumulates, the interest rate reality that converts the status premium into an ongoing, compounding financial obligation that transfers wealth from the status signaler to the financial institution that financed the signaling. The average credit card interest rate in the United States is approximately 20% to 24% annually as of recent data. The household carrying $25,000 in credit card debt, a common balance for the wealth signaling household that has used credit to bridge the gap between income and status maintenance costs, is paying $5,000 to $6,000 per year in interest. This interest payment produces no asset, builds no equity, creates no return. It is pure transfer from the household's income to the financial institution's revenue in exchange for the debt that financed consumption that has already been consumed and that is no longer providing any value. The auto loan that financed the status vehicle is typically at 6% to 8% interest annually, lower than credit card rates, but applied to a depreciating asset that is simultaneously losing 15% to 20% of its value per year in the early ownership years. The person financing a $50,000 vehicle at 7% is paying $3,500 per year in interest on an asset that is losing $7,500 to $10,000 per year in value. The combined annual financial loss from the financed status vehicle, interest plus depreciation, is $11,000 to $13,500 per year from a single purchase. The mortgage on the status premium house is at lower interest rates, but on a larger balance, producing larger absolute interest payments and applied to an asset whose status premium component may not appreciate proportionally to the functional component. The household that is paid a $250,000 status premium on a house is carrying $250,000 of mortgage debt that is financing appearance rather than function, and the interest on that $250,000, even at relatively low mortgage rates, is $10,000 to $15,000 per year. The aggregate annual interest cost of the full wealth signaling debt stack, credit card debt, auto loan, and housing status premium for the typical wealth signaling household in the upper middle income range is $20,000 to $35,000 per year. Every dollar of this interest is money that is not building wealth. Every dollar of this interest is the specific annual ongoing financial cost of having previously chosen appearance over accumulation. The lifestyle lock. Why escaping the trap is so difficult. Here's the specific mechanism that makes the wealth signaling debt trap so difficult to exit once it is fully assembled. The lifestyle lock that makes the financially correct adjustments psychologically and socially costly in ways that most financial advice underestimates. The wealth signaling lifestyle, once established, creates social obligations that make its reduction genuinely difficult independent of the mathematical analysis. The friends whose social activities have been organized around consumption at a specific level, the professional community whose expectations of presentation have been established by years of wealth signaling behavior, the family members whose assumptions about lifestyle and generosity have been calibrated to the signal that has been consistently produced, the neighborhood whose social norms have been observed and maintained. Reducing the lifestyle to the level that would enable meaningful wealth accumulation requires departing from all of these social expectations simultaneously, driving the modest car in the neighborhood of luxury vehicles, declining the expensive dinners in the social group that defines relationships through shared consumption experiences, moving to the less prestigious house in the social environment that reads housing as a proxy for success and character. Each individual departure is manageable. The aggregate social cost of departing from the full wealth signaling lifestyle is significant. A genuine restructuring of the social environment, a genuine renegotiation of the relationships that the lifestyle has built, a genuine confrontation with the identity that the consumption pattern has constructed. This is why the financially correct advice, reduce the lifestyle, redirect to investment, is so frequently not followed even by people who intellectually agree with it. The mathematical case is clear. The social and psychological cost of implementation is high enough that most people prefer to adjust their timeline rather than their lifestyle, to plan to start wealth building after the car is paid off, after the kids are older, after the mortgage is refinanced, after some future point at which the cost of starting feels lower than it does today. The future point at which starting feels easy never arrives. The lifestyle lock tightens with each passing year as the social obligations deepen and the financial obligations accumulate. The exit from the trap is always available and always costly, and the cost is lowest at the earliest possible moment, which for most people in the trap is right now. The emergency that changes everything. Here's the specific event that most frequently catalyzes the exit from the wealth signaling trap that voluntary financial analysis alone fails to produce. The financial emergency that removes the choice about whether to restructure and replaces it with the necessity of restructuring, the job loss that reveals the absence of any financial buffer, the medical expense that reveals the absence of any accessible savings, the divorce that requires the financial infrastructure to be unwound and reveals that the net worth behind the impressive lifestyle is essentially zero, the business downturn that reveals the dependence on a specific income level to maintain obligations that are not optional. These events are painful. They are also, with a frequency that is too consistent to be coincidental, the specific moments at which the trajectory of the wealth signaling household permanently changes when the lifestyle restructuring that voluntary analysis couldn't produce is forced by circumstance, and when the restructuring, once completed, reveals that the life on the other side of the status maintenance obligations is both financially and experientially better than the life inside them. The insight that the emergency produces is specific. The status signals were consuming more than the status was worth. The lifestyle that felt necessary to maintain was not, in the actual experience of living it, producing proportional happiness. The restructuring that felt like loss was, in its aftermath, experienced as relief. The specific relief of financial obligations reduced to the level that income can comfortably support, of consumer debt eliminated, of the specific anxiety of financial precarity replaced by the specific satisfaction of financial margin. This insight is available without the emergency. The emergency simply makes it unavoidable. The person who develops the insight before the emergency has the opportunity to make the restructuring voluntary, which is both more comfortable and more financially optimal than waiting for circumstances to make it mandatory. Chapter 6. The Identity Shift. How to actually stop caring. What your car says about you. Here's the chapter that addresses the most practically important question this video raises, not the financial analysis, which is relatively straightforward once the numbers are run, but the psychological question of how to actually implement the financial analysis when the psychological barriers described in Chapter 2 are real, persistent, and not fully addressed by knowing they exist. Because knowing that the tribal status mechanism is driving wealth signaling spending doesn't automatically disable the tribal status mechanism. Knowing that social comparison is producing financially destructive behavior doesn't automatically stop the social comparison. Understanding the psychology is necessary but not sufficient. The sufficient condition is the specific identity work, the actual, practical psychological shift that allows a person to stop caring, genuinely rather than performatively, about what their consumption choices communicate to observers. This chapter is about how that shift actually happens, the specific experiences, practices, and cognitive reframes that produce the genuine identity change that the financial analysis alone cannot create. The reference group shift, the single most powerful identity lever. Here's the most powerful single lever for shifting the identity away from wealth signaling and toward wealth building. More powerful than any amount of financial education, any number of motivating calculations, or any depth of intellectual conviction about the value of wealth accumulation over wealth signaling, the change in the primary reference group. The reference group, the specific set of people whose consumption, values, and financial orientations most influence a person's sense of what is normal and what is expected, is the primary architect of financial behavior in ways that most people dramatically underestimate. The person whose primary reference group consumes at the level of their income will consume at the level of their income regardless of what they know about compound interest. The person whose primary reference group prioritizes wealth accumulation over wealth signaling will naturally orient toward wealth accumulation even in the absence of explicit financial discipline. This is not a metaphor. It is the specific documented mechanism through which social norms shape individual behavior. The financial behavior of the people you spend the most time with is the strongest single predictor of your own financial behavior, stronger than income, stronger than education, stronger than financial literacy, stronger than stated financial goals. The practical implication is direct and uncomfortable. If the primary reference group is oriented toward wealth signaling, the most financially impactful single change available is the gradual development of a new primary reference group that is oriented toward wealth building. Not the dramatic, cruel rejection of existing relationships that is neither necessary nor advisable, but the deliberate cultivation of relationships with people whose financial values, consumption orientations, and life priorities reflect the direction the financial life is intended to go. The online communities where people discuss index fund investing, financial independence, and the philosophy of stealth wealth. The local network of business owners whose primary competitive orientation is building businesses rather than performing success. The friends whose idea of a good weekend is cooking together at home rather than competing over restaurant choices. The colleagues whose professional identity is rooted in competence and contribution rather than visible markers of professional status. Spending time with people who don't care what you drive, who genuinely don't register the car as a status signal because they've stopped playing the status game themselves, is the single most effective way to stop caring what you drive. The reference group shift is the identity lever that moves the most weight. The values clarification exercise, finding what actually matters. Here's the specific cognitive exercise that produces the most durable identity shift away from wealth signaling. The values clarification that identifies what the wealth signaling spending is actually costing in terms of the things that actually matter. The exercise is simple in structure and genuinely uncomfortable in honest execution. It involves listing the things that produce the most genuine, lasting satisfaction in the actual experience of living, not the things that produce the most impressive social signal, but the things whose presence or absence most directly affects the quality of daily life. The list that most people produce when they do this exercise honestly includes time with specific people they love, freedom from financial anxiety and financial obligation, the ability to work on things that are genuinely meaningful rather than simply lucrative, physical health and the energy it provides, specific experiences that produce genuine memory and genuine perspective, creative engagement with things that genuinely interest them. The list that most people produce when they do this exercise does not prominently include the specific brand of car they drive, the specific neighborhood their address is in, the specific brand insignia on their clothing and accessories, the specific restaurant at which they are seen eating. The things that wealth signaling spending most intensively funds are largely absent from the honest account of what produces the most genuine satisfaction. This discrepancy between the things that actually produce satisfaction and the things that wealth signaling spending most intensively funds is the specific cognitive raw material for the identity shift. Not the abstract argument that wealth accumulation is better than wealth signaling, but the personal, specific, honest recognition that the things the signaling spending is funding are not the things that actually matter most to this specific person in this specific life. The identity shift from wealth signaler to wealth builder is not primarily a financial shift. It is a values clarification, the honest recognition of what actually produces a good life for this specific person, followed by the alignment of financial behavior with those genuine values rather than with the social performances that have been substituting for them. The experience versus possession, reframe. Here's the specific cognitive reframe that produces the most practical identity shift in the domain of consumer spending. The reframe that allows spending to continue serving genuine well-being while eliminating the status premium component that converts it into wealth destruction. The reframe is the shift from evaluating spending based on what it communicates to others to evaluating it based on what it actually produces in genuine personal experience. The car question stops being, "What does this car say about me?" and becomes, "What does this car actually feel like to drive, and does that feeling justify the premium over the functional alternative?" The housing question stops being, "What does this address communicate?" and becomes, "What is it actually like to live here, and does that experience justify the premium?" The clothing question stops being, "What does this brand signal?" and becomes, "Does this actually fit better, last longer, or look better in a way that I personally notice and value?" The honest application of this reframe to most status premium spending reveals that the experience differential between the status version and the functional equivalent is much smaller than the price differential suggests. The $50,000 car drives better than the $25,000 car. It does not drive twice as well. The $700,000 house is more spacious and more impressive than the $450,000 house. It is not $250,000 more comfortable to live in. The $400 shoes are well made and attractive. They are not 5 times more comfortable or 5 times more durable than the $80 equivalent. The experience reframe doesn't eliminate the preference for quality. It eliminates the specific premium that is being paid not for quality, but for signal. The component of the price that purchases the brand recognition, the status marker, the social signal, rather than any actual improvement in the personal experience of using the thing. The person who has genuinely applied the experience reframe to their spending finds that their spending naturally shifts toward experiences that produce genuine personal value, quality in the specific domains where quality is personally important, and away from the signal premiums that were consuming a large fraction of the spending budget while producing relatively little personal value. The net worth identity, building the alternative. Here's the final component of the identity shift, the positive alternative to the consumption-based identity that the wealth signaling exit requires, without which the exit produces the identity vacuum that makes relapse into status spending likely. The consumption-based identity, the sense of self that is grounded in the car driven, the house inhabited, the brands worn, is a real source of psychological meaning, however financially costly. The person who gives it up without building an alternative source of identity is left with a psychological void that the status spending was filling, and voids tend to fill themselves with whatever is most immediately available, often the same status spending that the void was supposed to have been vacated for. The positive alternative is the wealth-building identity, the specific sense of self that is grounded not in what is owned or displayed, but in what is being built, in the trajectory of the financial life, in the specific values and choices that the financial behavior reflects. The wealth-building identity is constructed through the specific practices of wealth building itself, the regular net worth review that produces the satisfaction of watching a genuine number grow, the investment account that is a record of decisions made and sustained, the financial independence timeline that gets closer with each month of continued accumulation, the specific knowledge that the financial trajectory is moving toward genuine freedom rather than being consumed by the maintenance of a performance, the person whose identity is genuinely rooted in what they are building, whose sense of self is genuinely satisfied by the trajectory of the financial life rather than by the appearance of the financial life, and does not need the status signals. Not as an act of willpower or principle, as a genuine preference. The net worth is more interesting than the car. The trajectory is more satisfying than the watch. The genuine progress toward genuine freedom is more compelling than the performance of having arrived. This is the identity shift that makes stealth wealth not a sacrifice, but a preference, and it is available to anyone willing to do the values work that produces it. Chapter 7. The Stealth Wealth Hall of Fame. People who looked poor and were extraordinarily rich. Here's the chapter that makes the abstract argument of this video concrete through the specific documented stories of people who built extraordinary wealth while maintaining a visible presentation that gave no indication of the financial reality underneath. The people who understood, either intuitively or through deliberate analysis, that looking poor was not incompatible with being rich, and was, in fact, frequently a condition of it. These are not obscure cases. Many of them are among the most financially successful people in modern history, and the consistency of the pattern across people who share almost nothing else in common, different industries, different starting points, different personalities, different eras, is the specific evidence that stealth wealth is not a personality quirk of a few eccentric billionaires, but a coherent financial philosophy that produces reliable outcomes when practiced. Warren Buffett, the Omaha Oracle who still lives in the same house. Here's the most famous and most frequently cited example of stealth wealth. Warren Buffett, currently one of the wealthiest people in human history, who has lived in the same house in Omaha, Nebraska, that he purchased in 1958 for $31,500. The house is not a shack. It is a comfortable 5-bedroom house in a pleasant Omaha neighborhood. It is also, by the standards of what a person of Buffett's wealth could purchase, and by the standards of what most financial executives of significantly lesser wealth actually do purchase, genuinely modest. There is no compound, There is no fleet of exotic vehicles. There is no private island. There is a house on a residential street in Omaha that Buffett has lived in for over 60 years because it genuinely serves his living needs and because the alternative would consume resources that are more productively deployed elsewhere. Buffett's explanation for his lifestyle choices in various interviews over the decades consistently returns to the same financial logic. The opportunity cost of consumption is the compound growth on the consumed resources. Every dollar spent on a grander lifestyle is a dollar that is not compounding at the returns that Berkshire Hathaway generates. At Berkshire's historical return rates, the cost of consuming any significant sum is not the nominal amount consumed, but the compounded value of that sum over decades, a number that is, for anyone who has seriously run the math, genuinely difficult to justify through any consumption experience. The specific financial lesson that Buffett's lifestyle choices illustrate is not that everyone should live as modestly as he does. It is that the returns on wealth are not found in consuming it, but in deploying it, and that the person who genuinely understands this finds the consumption option less compelling than the investment option at essentially every decision margin. Ingvar Kamprad, the IKEA billionaire who flew economy and drove a 1993 Volvo. Here's the story of the founder of IKEA, Ingvar Kamprad, who built one of the most valuable retail empires in history while maintaining a lifestyle that his much less wealthy employees would have recognized as comparable to their own. Kamprad flew economy class on commercial airlines. He drove a 1993 Volvo 240 for years, a car that was old and modest by any measure, let alone by the measure of a person whose net worth was in the tens of billions. He stayed in budget hotels when traveling. He shopped at markets in the afternoon when produce prices were reduced. He famously reused tea bags. The specific financial logic of Kamprad's frugality was not the savings produced by any individual modest decision. A saved tea bag is not financially significant to a billionaire. The logic was the same philosophy that built IKEA, the relentless commitment to eliminating waste and redirecting resources to productive use rather than to consumption. The person who can't bring themselves to waste a tea bag is expressing the same value orientation that produces a retail empire built on the relentless elimination of unnecessary cost. The frugality and the business success are expressions of the same underlying financial philosophy. Ronald Read, the gas station attendant who left $8 million. Here's the story that most dramatically illustrates the wealth illusion dynamic. The story that is most surprising and most clarifying about the relationship between visible financial status and actual financial accumulation. Ronald Read was a janitor and gas station attendant in Brattleboro, Vermont, who died in 2014 at the age of 92. He drove a used car. He wore clothes held together with safety pins. He lived in a modest house. He performed no visible wealth whatsoever, no signals, no indicators, nothing that would suggest to any observer that his financial position was in any way remarkable. When Read died, his estate was valued at approximately $8 million, an amount that was left primarily to the local library and hospital, stunning essentially everyone who knew him. Read had built his wealth through the same mechanisms available to anyone: consistent saving over a long career, patient investment in dividend-paying stocks, and the complete absence of the wealth-signaling spending that would have consumed the capital he was instead compounding. He had no investment strategy more sophisticated than buying good companies and not selling them. He had no income more remarkable than what a janitor and gas station attendant earns over a long career. He had no inheritance, no windfall, no special advantage. What he had was the specific combination of low visible consumption and consistent patient investment, sustained over a working life. That compound interest eventually converted into $8 million. The person observing Read's visible financial presentation would have assessed him as having essentially no wealth. The person observing his actual financial position would have assessed him as one of the most financially successful people in his community. The gap between those two assessments is the wealth illusion in its purest form. The quiet millionaires next door. Here's the statistical reality that the individual stories above represent at population scale. The documented pattern across the population of genuine millionaires that Thomas Stanley and William Danko's research revealed, and that subsequent research has consistently confirmed. The majority of American millionaires, the people with investable assets above $1 million, live in houses that are not the most expensive in their neighborhood, drive cars that are not luxury branded, wear clothing that is not designer labeled, and spend at levels that their income allows without the status premium that peer group observation would suggest their income level requires. They are, in most social contexts, invisible as wealthy. The social contexts in which they are visible, the financial advisor's office, the estate attorney's conference room, the brokerage account statement, are not public. The social context in which their wealth is not visible, the parking lot, the neighborhood street, the restaurant, are very public. The systematic underestimation of genuine millionaires and overestimation of high-income wealth. Signalers is therefore the consistent experience of anyone whose social assessments rely on visible consumption. The Hall of Fame these stories form is not a collection of extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. It is a collection of ordinary financial decisions, modest vehicles, appropriate housing, patient investment, absence of status premium spending, applied consistently over time by people who understood that the wealth they were building would never show in ways that casual social observation could detect, and who were entirely comfortable with that invisibility because they understood that the invisibility was a feature rather than a bug. Chapter 8. The Specific Traps. The Wealth Signaling Spending that is hardest to avoid. Here's the chapter that moves from the general analysis of wealth signaling to the specific, granular, real-world spending categories, where the wealth signaling trap is most likely to catch even people who have intellectually accepted the stealth wealth philosophy, the spending decisions where the social pressure, the identity investment, and the professional justification are most powerful, and where the financially destructive choice therefore feels most reasonable. The neighborhood trap. The most expensive social decision most people make. Here's the wealth signaling spending category that is simultaneously the most expensive and the most thoroughly rationalized as a non-status decision. The neighborhood choice. The neighborhood choice is rarely described as a status decision, even when status is its primary driver. It is described as a school quality decision, a commute decision, a safety decision, a quality of life decision. These justifications frequently contain genuine truth. School quality in particular is a legitimate consideration for families with children, and the quality differential between school districts is real enough to justify meaningful spending premiums. But the specific neighborhood selected is almost never the result of a pure school quality optimization. It is the result of a school quality optimization that is simultaneously a status optimization. The selection of the neighborhood that combines adequate or excellent school quality with the social signaling value of the address, the prestige of the enclave, the specific impression that the neighborhood makes on peers who will visit. The financially relevant question, what is the minimum neighborhood quality that genuinely serves the household's actual needs, including school quality, safety, and commute, is almost never the actual decision criterion. The actual decision criterion is typically the maximum neighborhood quality that the household can justify based on income and borrowing capacity, constrained loosely by budget rather than optimized against genuine need. The financial consequence of the neighborhood status premium, the difference between the genuinely adequate neighborhood and the additionally prestigious one, is the specific component of the housing cost that the previous chapter quantified. For most households, this premium is the largest single status expenditure in the financial life, and because it is embedded in a 30-year mortgage rather than presented as a monthly status expense, it feels like a fixed cost rather than a choice, which is precisely the cognitive framing that makes it most financially dangerous. The private school trap, where status and education become indistinguishable. Here's the wealth signaling spending category that is most emotionally charged and most difficult to analyze dispassionately because it involves children's education and therefore activates every parental anxiety available: private school tuition. Private school enrollment is, in some cases, a genuine educational investment. The specific school provides genuinely superior educational outcomes for the specific child, and the premium over public school alternatives is justified by those outcomes. In many cases, however, private school enrollment is primarily a status investment, the signal that the family provides for their child, the peer group access that the school provides, the social positioning that the school name provides, with the educational differential being significantly smaller than the tuition premium suggests. The specific financial analysis: private school tuition for K-12 education at a typical private school costs $15,000 to $50,000 per year per child. For a family with 2 children attending private school for 13 years, the total tuition expenditure is $390,000 to $1,300,000 before accounting for the investment return foregone on the capital deployed, the investment of $30,000 per year, the tuition premium for 2 children at a modest private school over a public school alternative, at 7% annual return for 13 years is approximately $597,000. For the more expensive private schools, the investment foregone is several times this amount. The honest question that most parents find genuinely difficult to ask is the specific educational outcome differential between the private school and the best available public school alternative worth $597,000 to $2 million in foregone wealth accumulation? For some families, in some specific educational contexts, the answer is genuinely yes. For many families, in many contexts, the honest answer, if the social signaling component of the decision could be isolated and removed, is probably not. The vacation Instagram trap, the experience that costs more than it delivers. Here's the wealth signaling spending category that is most difficult to address because it involves genuine experiences rather than merely status objects. The vacation spending that is simultaneously a genuine source of life enrichment and a significant source of status performance. The vacation is the one spending category where even committed stealth wealth practitioners often find the wealth signaling component most difficult to disentangle from genuine experience value, because the best vacations genuinely are enriching, genuinely do produce memories and perspectives that justify significant expenditure, and genuinely represent the kind of private value spending that the stealth wealth philosophy endorses. The specific wealth signaling component of vacation spending is not the vacation itself, but the specific premium that makes the vacation a social performance alongside an experience. The resort that is chosen partly because of the social recognition it receives when mentioned, the upgrade that is taken partly because of the signal it produces when photographed, the destination that is selected partly because of its current cultural cachet, rather than because it is the destination that would produce the most genuine personal value. The honest vacation question: what specific experience would produce the most genuine personal satisfaction, and what is the minimum expenditure required to produce that experience well? Typically produces a vacation that is both less expensive and more genuinely satisfying than the social performance vacation, because it is calibrated to actual preference rather than to the impression the destination and the hotel will make on social media. The technology upgrade trap: the smallest individual waste with the most consistent pattern. Here's the wealth signaling spending category that is individually least significant and collectively most revealing of the status spending pattern because it repeats most frequently and most automatically. The technology upgrade cycle: the smartphone upgrade that occurs every 2 years, not because the current phone has stopped functioning, but because the new version exists and signals current economic participation. The laptop replaced, not because it has ceased to serve its purpose, but because the newer model has features that are appealing rather than necessary. The headphones, the camera, the smartwatch, the streaming subscriptions accumulated beyond what is genuinely used. The full technology spending category for a household that participates in the full upgrade cycle is typically $3,000 to $8,000 per year in spending on technology that is upgraded or accumulated beyond genuine need. The wealth signaling component of technology spending is the specific premium paid for being current, for having the device that was released this year rather than the device that was released 2 years ago and that serves all the same genuine purposes for substantially less money. This premium is the specific expenditure that produces no genuine experience improvement. The person using the 2-year-old phone has essentially the same smartphone experience as the person using the current year's model, but produces the social signal of current economic participation that the upgrade cycle is designed to produce. Chapter 9: The Alternative Flex. What genuinely rich people actually show off. Here's the chapter that addresses the most common objection to the stealth wealth philosophy: The objection that framing wealthy behavior as deliberately modest misses the specific ways that genuinely wealthy people actually do display their wealth, just differently from the consumer goods display that the wealth signaling culture promotes. Because here's the truth, people who have built genuine wealth do flex. They just flex on things that are invisible to the casual observer, and that the casual observer, still playing the consumer status game, wouldn't fully recognize as flexes even if they saw them. The time flex, the most expensive status symbol. Nobody recognizes. Here's the status display that genuinely wealthy people most consistently exhibit, and that most people who observe it don't recognize as status at all: the control of their time. The genuinely wealthy person takes Tuesday afternoon off without explanation. They decline the meeting that would have been attended under financial necessity. They leave for vacation in October rather than in the 2 weeks that corporate employment permits. They pursue projects that are interesting rather than immediately lucrative. They spend time with their children during hours when most people are in offices. They exercise in the middle of the day. They read in the morning. They work on what engages them and decline what doesn't. None of these behaviors look like wealth to the casual observer. They look like unemployment, or eccentricity, or a flexible employer. What they actually represent is the most expensive status symbol available: the complete ownership of one's time, purchased with financial independence that no amount of consumer spending can provide. The consumer status game's most expensive item, the most prestigious car, the most impressive watch, the most exclusive vacation, costs money. The time flex costs everything it took to become financially independent. It is more expensive than any consumer good available, and it is invisible to the person still playing the consumer status game, which is one of the reasons it is so rarely competed for in the consumer status arena. The optionality flex, the freedom to choose, that money actually provides. Here's the second genuine wealthy person flex, the one that is even less visible than the time flex and even more valuable: optionality. The specific freedom to make life decisions based on what is most genuinely desired rather than based on what is financially required. The genuinely wealthy person can leave the job they dislike without a plan, can take the career risk that interests them, can move to the city that fits them better, can support the family member who needs it, can decline the business opportunity that would be lucrative but ethically uncomfortable, can say yes to the creative project that pays nothing and means everything, can change their mind about any major life direction without being constrained by the financial consequences of the change. None of these flexes are visible to observers. The person who declined the lucrative but soul-destroying job offer is not distinguishable from the person who was never offered it. The person who moved across the country for personal fulfillment is not distinguishable from the person who moved for financial necessity. The optionality that financial independence provides is exercised in the private domain of life decisions, not in the public domain of consumer display, and it is therefore completely invisible to anyone playing the consumer status game. But it is the specific thing that money actually buys when money has been accumulated rather than displayed. Not the car, not the watch, not the house. The freedom to choose. The freedom to live the life that is most genuinely desired rather than the life that is financially required. This is the flex that the genuinely wealthy exercise. It is the flex that the wealth signalers are spending their way away from. The relationship quality flex. Here's the third genuine wealthy person flex, the one that is most personally meaningful and most consistent with the actual experience of what financial independence enables, the quality and depth of personal relationships that financial security permits. The person under financial stress, whose income is committed to obligations, whose financial anxiety is a persistent background feature of daily life, whose time is consumed by the income-generating activities that the spending level requires, is not fully available to the relationships that most genuinely matter. The parental presence that financial anxiety partially forecloses, the marriage investment that the time demands of financial maintenance partially prevent, the friendship depth that the exhaustion of financial maintenance partially limits, the person whose financial obligations are modest relative to their income, whose financial anxiety is low because the margin between income and spending is substantial, has a genuine availability for relationships that the wealth signaler, whose income is consumed by the maintenance of the appearance, does not have. This availability produces relationship quality that is a genuine life enrichment, more valuable and more durable than any consumer good, and that is the specific flex of genuine financial security. The generosity flex, giving without performance. Here's the fourth genuine wealthy person flex, the one that is most publicly misunderstood because the flashy version of it is genuinely performed wealth signaling, while the genuine version is something entirely different, generosity. The performed generosity of the wealth signaler is the charitable donation that comes with a building named after the donor, the social media post about the cause that prominently features the donor's contribution, the public philanthropy that is calibrated to produce social recognition of the generosity alongside whatever genuine good it produces. The genuine generosity of the stealth wealthy is the anonymous donation, the help given to a family member or friend without announcement or recognition, the charitable contribution that occurs because the financial position allows it and the cause matters, without any interest in the social signal the generosity produces. This generosity is not less meaningful because it is invisible. It is more meaningful because its motivation is purely the good it produces, rather than the impression it creates. The financial freedom to be genuinely generous, to give at the level that genuinely helps without calculating the cost to lifestyle maintenance, is a specific and valuable flex that financial independence enables and financial dependence forecloses. The person whose spending is consuming their full income has no financial freedom to be genuinely generous. The person whose spending is modest relative to income has the specific freedom to give at whatever level their values motivate. Chapter 10. The Practical Transition. How to actually make the shift without losing everything that matters. Here's the chapter that addresses the most practical question this video raises. Not the philosophical case for stealth wealth, not the psychological analysis of wealth signaling, not the inspiring stories of people who built genuine wealth invisibly, but the specific practical question of how to actually make the transition from wealth signaling financial behavior to wealth building financial behavior without destroying the social world, the professional relationships, and the genuine enjoyments that the current lifestyle includes. Because the transition is real, it requires real decisions, and the person who makes it without a practical framework is more likely to make it badly, either too dramatically, destroying social relationships unnecessarily in a burst of aggressive financial minimalism, or too tentatively, making adjustments so modest that the financial trajectory doesn't meaningfully change. The audit. Where the transition starts. Here's the first practical step in the transition from wealth signaling to wealth building. The specific financial audit that identifies the actual status premium in the current spending and provides the concrete starting point for the transition. The audit is not a comprehensive budget review. It is a status premium isolation exercise. The specific identification of what fraction of current spending is driven by the signal it produces rather than by the genuine experience value it delivers. The question for every significant spending category is not, do I spend this, but how much of this spending is for the experience, and how much is for the signal? The car. What fraction of the current car payment is for the transportation experience, and what fraction is for the brand and status signal? The answer for most car purchases in the luxury or near luxury category is that 40% to 60% of the premium above the functional equivalent is signal rather than experience. The housing, what fraction of the current mortgage or rent is for the living experience? The space, the safety, the specific neighborhood features that affect daily life, and what fraction is for the address, the prestige, the impression? The answer for most households that have bought at the maximum they could borrow in the most prestigious accessible neighborhood is that a significant fraction, often 20% to 35% of the premium above a genuinely adequate alternative, is signal. The clothing and accessories, what fraction of the spending on branded goods is for the quality, the fit, and the actual experience of wearing, and what fraction is for the brand recognition and status signal? For most luxury branded goods, the status premium is 50% to 80% of the price differential above a quality non-luxury equivalent. The aggregate status premium revealed by the audit, the total spending that is driven by signal rather than experience, is the specific resource that the transition is going to redirect. For most households in the upper middle income range that are wealth signaling, this aggregate is $3,000 to $8,000 per month. For households in the higher range of the income distribution that are fully committed to wealth signaling, it is significantly higher. The transition sequence, the order that minimizes pain and maximizes progress. Here's the specific sequence for implementing the transition that produces the most financial progress with the least social disruption. The order of changes that is both financially optimal and psychologically sustainable. First, the investment infrastructure. Before reducing any specific spending, establish the investment infrastructure that the status premium is going to fund. Open the investment accounts. Set up the automatic contributions. Define the target allocation. The investment infrastructure needs to exist before the spending reduction occurs, not because the money needs to be in the account before it can be saved, but because having the positive destination for the redirected spending makes the redirection feel like building something rather than merely losing something. Second, the smallest and least socially visible status premiums. The technology upgrade cycle. The luxury brand premium on consumer goods that are used privately rather than displayed publicly. The dining upgrade that is driven by social performance rather than genuine food preference. These are the spending reductions that produce financial results without the social visibility that would require explanation or produce social friction. Starting here builds momentum and financial confidence without the social cost of the more visible changes. Third, the vehicle decision at the next natural transition point, not through immediate dramatic action. The next time the car decision arises, the lease that ends, the loan that pays off, the vehicle that genuinely needs replacement, make the transition to the functional equivalent rather than the status equivalent. The transition at the natural decision point avoids the sunk cost of abandoning a current vehicle and the social drama of an unexplained sudden downgrade. Fourth, the housing decision at the next natural transition point, and only after the other changes have stabilized. The housing transition is the most financially significant and the most socially visible of the wealth signaling reductions, and it should be made deliberately, with full analysis, at a natural decision point, the lease renewal, the life stage change that makes different housing genuinely appropriate, rather than as an impulsive reaction to the financial analysis. The social script. How to talk about the transition without making it weird. Here's the specific practical challenge that the transition creates in social contexts. The moments when the changed spending behavior requires some form of acknowledgement or explanation to people who notice it, and the specific social scripts that handle those moments without either lying about the financial philosophy or delivering an uninvited lecture about stealth wealth to people who didn't ask. The most effective social script for the vehicle change. I ran the numbers on what I was spending on cars and decided to redirect that toward investing. I'm fine with driving less impressive cars in exchange for retiring earlier. This script is honest, is not preachy, frames the decision as a personal financial optimization rather than a moral position, and typically produces genuine curiosity rather than social friction, the most effective social script for the housing decision. We looked at what we actually use and enjoy about where we live and decided we were paying for space and an address we didn't really need. The savings are going into investments that will give us more options sooner. Again, honest, personal, framed as optimization, and likely to produce curiosity rather than judgment. The most effective social script for the consumer goods transition. I realized I was paying a lot for brand names and not getting proportionally better actual product, so I've been shifting toward quality without the brand premium. This is genuinely relatable to most people, because most people have had some version of this realization. The scripts share several features. They are honest about the financial motivation, they are personal rather than preachy, they frame the transition as optimization rather than deprivation, and they invite curiosity rather than defensiveness. They do not include any suggestion that the listener should make similar changes, and they do not position the speaker as financially virtuous relative to the listener. They are simply honest descriptions of personal financial decisions made for personal financial reasons. The timeline. What the financial life looks like. After the transition, here's the specific financial projection of the post-transition household. The numbers that make the transition's value concrete. and that provide the motivation to sustain it through the social friction and the adjustment period. The household that has redirected $5,000 per month from status premium spending to investment, a conservative estimate for the full transition in an upper middle income dual income household, is investing $60,000 per year. At 7% annual return, $60,000 per year builds the following portfolio values by time period. 5 years, approximately $415,000. Not financial independence, but a meaningful financial buffer. 3 to 5 years of living expenses at the reduced lifestyle cost, which is itself a specific and valuable form of freedom. 10 years, approximately $1,038,000. $1 million from 10 years of redirected status spending. Financial independence is within reach at this portfolio level for a household whose spending has been reduced to the non-status premium level. 15 years, approximately $1,940,000, near $2 million. At a 4% withdrawal rate, this portfolio generates $77,600 per year, sufficient to fund the genuine satisfaction lifestyle that the Stealth Wealth household has been living, without requiring additional employment income. Financial independence achieved 15 years after the transition by redirecting the money that was previously being spent on signals nobody needed to see. 20 years, approximately $3,280,000. The wealth that the 20 years of status spending would have consumed, the $3,280,000 that was there the whole time, available to be built, waiting for the decision to build it, rather than to perform having it. Chapter 11, The Children Problem, How Wealth Signaling Gets Passed Down and How to Stop It. Here's the chapter that addresses the dimension of wealth signaling that is simultaneously the most emotionally charged and the most financially consequential across generations. The specific ways that the wealth signaling psychology gets transmitted to children, the specific financial damage that transmission produces in the next generation, and the specific practices that interrupt the transmission before it becomes the financial legacy that the family passes down instead of actual wealth. Because here's the uncomfortable reality about wealth signaling as a financial behavior. It is not primarily a financial habit. It is a psychological orientation, a specific relationship between self-worth, social status, and visible consumption. And psychological orientations are transmitted to children with the same reliability and the same invisibility as physical characteristics. The child who grows up in a household where the car communicates social position, where the house signals family success, where the clothing brand is a social currency, and where the spending level is calibrated to the peer group's consumption standard absorbs all of this as the normal relationship between money and life before they have any conscious framework for evaluating it. The child doesn't learn we signal wealth through consumer spending. They simply learn that the car matters, that the neighborhood matters, that what people think of the family's financial presentation matters, and that money is primarily a resource for maintaining and improving that presentation rather than a resource for building financial security and independence. This transmitted orientation is the specific financial inheritance that wealth signaling households pass to their children. And it is, in most cases, far more financially damaging than any absence of financial inheritance. The child who inherits $100,000 from a wealth signaling parent and an unconscious orientation towards spending that inheritance on status signals is worse off, in long-term financial terms, than the child who inherits nothing from a stealth wealth parent, but absorbs the orientation that converts every dollar earned into compounding wealth rather than consumed signals. The specific transmission mechanisms. Here's the specific way that the wealth signaling orientation transmits from parent to child, the observable behaviors and cultural messages that install the orientation before the child has any conscious framework for evaluating it. The car conversation, the specific commentary that parents make about the cars of others, the admiration expressed for the impressive vehicle, the slight edge in the voice when discussing a neighbor's car downgrade, the specific pleasure in showing the child the new family vehicle. All of this teaches the child that cars are social objects, that their primary significance is the impression they make, and that the right car is a source of pride and the wrong car is a source of mild shame. The child who has absorbed this lesson will, when they reach the age of independent financial decision-making, experience the car purchase as primarily a social decision rather than a financial one. The neighborhood commentary. The specific ways that parents talk about neighborhoods, which ones are good, which ones are less desirable, what moving to a specific neighborhood says about the family, teaches the child that location is a social statement and that the family's address is a component of its social identity. The child absorbs the message that living in the right neighborhood is important in ways that go beyond practical considerations of safety and school quality. The consumption celebration. The specific way that new purchases are treated as events, the excitement around the new car, the pride in the new house, the pleasure in showing new clothing or accessories to the social network, teaches the child that acquiring new things is an occasion for celebration and social recognition. The child learns that consumption is rewarding not just for its functional value, but for the social experience of displaying new acquisitions. The financial anxiety concealment. The specific way that wealth-signaling parents manage the financial anxiety that maintaining the status presentation often produces by concealing it from children to avoid disrupting the presentation of success, teaches children that financial reality is something to be managed privately, while the presentation of success is maintained publicly. This lesson is particularly damaging because it installs the specific dissociation between financial reality and financial presentation that makes wealth signaling feel necessary rather than optional. What stealth wealth parents do differently: here's the specific parenting behavior of stealth wealth households, the practices that transmit a fundamentally different relationship with money, status, and financial decision-making to the next generation. They talk about money honestly, not anxiously, not with the scarcity framing that produces financial fear rather than financial wisdom, but with the specific honesty that treats money as a resource that is managed according to values and goals, rather than a social performance that is maintained according to peer group standards. The stealth wealth household's children hear conversations about investment returns, about the value of compound interest, about the specific financial trade-offs that family decisions involve, calibrated to the child's age and comprehension level, but consistently honest about the financial reality rather than maintaining a performance. They make the values underlying financial decisions explicit. When the family buys the modest car rather than the impressive one, the stealth wealth parent explains why, not as a deprivation, we can't afford better, but as a deliberate choice. We could spend more on a car that would impress people, but we'd rather invest that money so that we have more options later. The child learns that the modest car is not evidence of financial limitation, but evidence of financial priority, a specific and valuable financial lesson that the wealth-signaling household never has the opportunity to teach. They expose children to the math of compound interest early. The stealth wealth parent's equivalent of the birds and bees conversation, in financial terms, is the compound interest demonstration, showing the child specifically what a regular savings contribution becomes over time, what the opportunity cost of a specific consumer purchase is in compounded investment terms, what financial independence actually means, and what it actually requires. This mathematical literacy instilled early is the specific cognitive tool that allows the child to evaluate financial decisions on their actual long-term merits rather than on their immediate social signal. They model the genuine wealthy person flexes, the child who sees the parent control their time, who observes that the parent takes Tuesday afternoon off, declines the meeting that would compromise a family activity, spends genuine, unhurried time in relationships, learns that time freedom is the actual product of financial success rather than the consumer goods whose purchase the consumer status game would suggest. This lesson is more valuable than any amount of financial education because it changes the child's understanding of what money is actually for. The allowance architecture. Here's the specific practical tool that stealth wealth parents use most consistently to transmit the wealth-building orientation rather than the wealth-signaling orientation, the deliberate design of the child's first financial experience, through the allowance structure. The allowance is the child's first financial system, the first experience of income, budgeting, saving, and spending that shapes the foundational financial psychology. Most allowance structures are designed primarily as behavioral management tools, reward systems for chores, spending money for discretionary purchases, rather than as financial education vehicles. The stealth wealth allowance is designed specifically as a financial education vehicle. The specific structure, the allowance is divided into 3 categories: spending, saving, and giving. The spending category is immediately available for whatever the child chooses. The saving category accumulates in a visible way: a jar, a dedicated savings account, a chart on the wall that makes the compound growth of saving visible and tangible. The giving category is designated for genuine charitable contribution, teaching the relationship between financial resources and genuine generosity rather than performed generosity. The financial education that this allowance structure produces is the specific experiential understanding of the 3 financial orientations: spending, saving, giving, that the child who receives an unstructured allowance doesn't develop. The child who has watched their saving category grow for 6 months and then made a deliberate decision about a larger purchase has experienced in miniature the specific patience and deliberateness that wealth building requires. This experience is worth more than any amount of financial instruction. The legacy decision. Here's the final dimension of the children problem: the specific decision about what kind of financial legacy the family is going to pass to the next generation, that the wealth signaling versus stealth wealth choice ultimately produces. The wealth signaling household's legacy to its children is twofold: whatever financial assets remain after a lifetime of status premium spending, in which for households that have status signaled throughout their wealth building years is typically modest relative to the income earned, and the psychological orientation toward money that the children absorbed through 2 decades of observation. Both parts of this legacy are typically less valuable than the income earned would have allowed, because both the assets and the orientation have been depleted by the wealth signaling that consumed them. The stealth wealth household's legacy is also twofold: the financial assets accumulated through decades of redirecting the status premium toward investment, which, for households that have consistently practiced stealth wealth through the accumulation years, are typically substantial relative to the income earned, and the psychological orientation toward money that the children absorbed. Both parts of this legacy are typically more valuable than the income would have suggested possible, because both the assets and the orientation have been compounded by the wealth building that preserved and developed them. The legacy decision is the wealth signaling versus stealth wealth choice played out across generations. The specific long-term financial consequence of the parking lot decision that this video began with. The person in the dented sedan is not just making a better financial decision for themselves, they are making a better financial decision for every generation that follows them and absorbs the orientation that their choices transmit. Chapter 12. The final reframe. Why looking poor to be rich is actually the richest way to live. Here's the final chapter, the one that steps back from the financial analysis, the psychological mechanisms, the specific spending traps, and the practical transition framework, and asks the deeper question that all of those elements have been circling without quite landing on directly. Is the stealth wealth life the life of modest, visible consumption and substantial invisible accumulation actually a better life, independent of its financial outcomes? The financial case for looking poor to be rich has been made in exhaustive detail across the previous 11 chapters. The mathematical outcomes are clear. The compound interest works in the direction of the person who redirects status spending to investment. The net worth trajectories diverge dramatically over time in favor of the stealth wealth practitioner. The financial case is not the question of this chapter. The question of this chapter is whether the stealth wealth life is genuinely, experientially, in the actual daily texture of living it, a better life, whether the person who owns the modest car and the appropriately sized house and the functional consumer goods and the growing investment account is having a better experience of being alive than the person whose consumption is impressive and whose financial position is precarious. The answer, which is less obvious than the financial case but equally well supported by evidence, is yes. And the reasons why are worth understanding not as financial arguments, but as observations about what actually produces a good life. The anxiety differential. Here's the most immediately experiential difference between the wealth signaling life and the stealth wealth life. The one that is most directly felt in the daily experience of living rather than in the quarterly investment statement, the financial anxiety differential. The wealth signaling life is characterized by a specific and persistent background anxiety, the specific stress of knowing that the financial position is precarious relative to the commitments that maintain it, the income that must continue, the obligations that cannot be reduced, the financial margin that is too thin to absorb the unexpected, the retirement that is too far away to feel real but too close to ignore. This anxiety is not a pathology. It is the rational response to a genuinely precarious financial position, to the specific reality of a lifestyle that requires the full current income to maintain and that would be impossible to sustain if that income were interrupted. The stealth wealth life is characterized by the specific absence of this anxiety, not because the financial situation is perfect or because all financial concerns have been eliminated, but because the margin between income and spending is large enough that the unexpected is genuinely absorbable, the obligations are genuinely manageable, and the trajectory is genuinely in the right direction. The background financial anxiety that characterizes the wealth signaling life is simply not present, because there is nothing in the honest financial assessment of the stealth wealth household to be genuinely anxious about. This anxiety differential is worth quantifying in experiential terms. The financial anxiety of the wealth signaling household is not something that turns off at 5 p.m. and turns on at 9 a.m. It is a persistent, low-grade, continuous feature of the psychological experience of the wealth signaling life. It affects sleep quality. It affects presence in relationships. It affects the ability to be genuinely in the non-financial moments of life, the dinner, the conversation, the weekend, without the financial situation claiming some fraction of cognitive and emotional attention. The person in the dented sedan is having a better dinner than the person in the luxury SUV, not because the restaurant is better, because the financial anxiety that is partially consuming the luxury SUV driver's dinner experience is simply not present at the stealth wealth driver's table. The authenticity dividend. Here's the second experiential dimension of the stealth wealth life that makes it genuinely better as a life rather than merely financially superior. The specific authenticity that comes from living in alignment with genuine values rather than with social performance. The wealth signaling life requires a continuous low-grade performance, the maintenance of the presentation that the status signaling decisions have committed the person to maintaining. The car must be impressive. The house must be impressive. The clothing must communicate the right signal. The restaurant must be at the right level. The vacation must produce the right photographs. None of this performance is particularly exhausting in any individual instance. It is cumulatively the persistent background effort of maintaining an identity that is partly constructed from consumed signals rather than from genuine values and genuine choices. The stealth wealth life does not require this performance. The car is chosen for its transportation function. The house is chosen for its genuine livability. The clothing is chosen for its actual qualities rather than its brand recognition. The restaurant is chosen for the food rather than the social recognition of the choice. Every consumption decision is made on the basis of genuine preference rather than on the basis of the signal it produces, which produces a consumption pattern that is both less expensive and more authentically satisfying. The authenticity dividend is the specific satisfaction of knowing that the life being lived is genuinely the life being chosen, that the visible financial presentation is not a performance maintained for observers, but an honest expression of the values and priorities that the person actually holds. This satisfaction is difficult to quantify and genuinely significant in the daily experience of living. It is the specific psychological reward of integrity, of alignment between values and behavior, that the wealth signaling life, which requires the consistent subordination of financial values to social performance, cannot provide. The freedom that is the whole point. Here's the final and most important dimension of the stealth wealth life, the one that all the financial analysis, all the psychological mechanisms, all the practical transitions, and all the Hall of Fame stories have been pointing toward. The specific freedom that the accumulated wealth eventually produces, and that the wealth signaling life perpetually defers. Financial independence. The specific state in which the passive income generated by accumulated assets covers the cost of the genuine lifestyle, the sufficiency lifestyle, the life of genuine satisfactions rather than performed ones, without requiring additional employment income to maintain. the state in which work is genuinely optional, in which time is genuinely the primary resource rather than genuinely the primary commodity sold to fund consumption, in which the choices about how to spend each day are made on the basis of genuine desire rather than financial necessity. This freedom is not available to the wealth-signaling household regardless of income level, because the wealth-signaling household's obligations grow with its income, ensuring that the income is always necessary and the freedom is always a future aspiration rather than a current reality. The person earning $300,000 per year who has built a lifestyle that requires $280,000 per year to maintain is not free. They are employed. Their employment is optional only in the specific sense that they could choose to earn significantly less at the cost of the lifestyle, which is not freedom but a different set of constraints. Financial independence is available to the stealth wealth household at income levels that the wealth-signaling household's consumption prevents it from reaching, because the stealth wealth household's spending is calibrated to genuine sufficiency rather than to income capacity, leaving the margin that investment converts into the accumulated wealth that eventually generates the passive income that finances the sufficiency lifestyle without employment. Income. The person who has practiced stealth wealth consistently through their income-earning years arrives at financial independence, at the specific freedom of genuinely optional employment, years or decades before the equivalent wealth-signaling household, and they arrive with a specific advantage beyond the financial one. They have been living the genuine satisfaction life rather than the performed satisfaction life for the entire accumulation period. They have not been suffering through decades of deprivation toward a future payoff. They have been living genuinely well, with low financial anxiety, with genuine authenticity, with the specific satisfactions of a life organized around actual values, while simultaneously building the financial position that makes the freedom that was always the point finally, fully, completely, undeniably theirs. The reframe that changes everything. Here's the final reframe that this entire video has been building toward: the specific cognitive shift that converts the stealth wealth philosophy from a financial strategy into a genuinely better way of living. Looking poor to be rich is not a sacrifice. It is not an extended period of deprivation in exchange for a future payoff. It is not the choice to live less well now in order to live better later. It is the choice to live genuinely rather than performatively, to consume in alignment with genuine values rather than social performance, to build something real rather than display something impressive, to experience the specific satisfactions of a life organized around actual preferences rather than around the maintenance of a presentation. The modest car is not a sacrifice. It is the freedom from the specific financial obligation that the impressive car imposes, and the specific investment of that freed obligation in a future that the impressed car would have consumed. The appropriately sized house is not a deprivation. It is the specific release from the financial and maintenance obligations that the impressively sized house imposes, and the specific redirection of those obligations toward the financial independence that the impressive house would have permanently prevented. The functional consumer goods are not a settling for less. They are the specific choice of actual quality over performed quality, the recognition that the experience of the thing matters and the signal of the thing mostly doesn't, and the financial consequence of living that recognition. The growing investment account that nobody sees is not an invisible victory. It is the most visible possible victory to the only observer whose assessment of the financial life has any genuine consequence, the person living it. That person is in the dented sedan in the parking lot. They know exactly what the gleaming SUV across the parking lot cost its driver, not in dollars, but in the compound growth of the dollars that paid for it, in the financial anxiety that maintaining it requires, in the freedom that consuming it perpetually deferred. They got out of the dented sedan without a second thought about what it communicated. They know what it's building. They're genuinely, quietly, deeply fine with looking poor, because they know exactly how rich they're getting. Conclusion. Let's come back to the parking lot. The person in the dented sedan has been thinking about wealth the right way for longer than the person in the gleaming SUV. Not because they're smarter, not because they had a better starting point, not because they were given some financial insight that was withheld from everyone else, but because they understood, at some point in their financial life, the specific thing that this video has been building toward from the first sentence. Wealth is not a performance. It is an accumulation, and you cannot accumulate it at the same rate that you are performing it. The specific financial mathematics of this relationship have been shown across 10 chapters in more detail than most people ever apply to their own financial lives. The car analysis, the housing analysis, the aggregate status premium calculation, the 30-year compound growth projections that convert the monthly status premium into the multi-million-dollar wealth gap that the two people in the parking lot represent. The psychology has been described, the tribal status mechanism, the social comparison trap, the identity investment that makes wealth signaling feel like self-expression rather than social performance, because understanding the mechanism is the precondition for stepping outside it. The alternative has been described, the stealth wealth philosophy, the genuine wealthy person flexes of time and optionality and relationship quality and private generosity, the behavioral fingerprint of people who are actually, durably, genuinely building wealth rather than performing it. The transition has been described, the audit that isolates the status premium, the sequence that implements the transition with minimum social disruption, the social scripts that handle the moments of explanation, the financial projections that make the transition's value concrete and motivating. Here's what remains, and it is the part of this video that no analysis, no psychology, no story, and no projection can provide: the decision. The decision that the person in the dented sedan made at some specific moment. Some moment that looked, from the outside, like no moment at all. A car purchase decision, a housing decision, an investment account opened rather than a status upgrade purchased. A moment where the analysis was done honestly and the decision was made in favor of the actual rather than the apparent, the accumulated rather than the displayed, the genuine rather than the performed. That decision is available to everyone watching this video right now. The mathematics don't care what year it is made. The compound interest doesn't care about the social context in which the decision happens. The portfolio that will be built from today's redirected status premium is available to anyone who decides today to redirect it, regardless of how many years of status premium have already been spent, regardless of how deeply the current lifestyle is embedded in the social fabric, regardless of how convincing the professional image justification has previously felt. The genuinely rich look poor because they have made a specific decision about which game they are playing. They are playing the wealth game rather than the wealth signaling game. And in the wealth game, the score is kept in accounts that nobody sees, the progress is invisible to casual observers, the victories are private and cumulative rather than public and instantaneous, and the person who has been winning for 20 years is indistinguishable, in the parking lot, from the person who has barely started. The person in the dented sedan is winning. The dented sedan is not the cost of winning. It is the evidence of having decided to win on the terms that actually produce winning. You now know what those terms are. The parking lot is waiting. Which car are you going to get out of?